The grain silo had a hole in it the size of a truck. Dennis Wade stared at the damage and rubbed his weathered face with both hands. Something had crashed into his property during the night, and whatever it was had torn through his equipment like paper. He followed the trail of destruction across his wheat field. The morning sun painted everything gold, but Dennis barely noticed the beauty around him. His boots crunched through broken stalks as he walked toward a smoking crater at the far edge of his land. A metallic pod sat half buried in the dirt. It looked like the emergency containers that smugglers used when they needed to dump cargo fast. Dennis had seen enough crime broadcasts to recognize illegal tech when he saw it. His farm computer spoke through the earpiece he wore. "Dennis, that container is not registered. I must report this to authorities." "Give me a minute, Hal," Dennis said. He approached the pod carefully. Scorch marks covered the hull. Someone had jettisoned this thing from orbit in a hurry. The access panel hung open. Dennis peered inside and his breath caught in his throat. Dragon hatchlings. 12 of them, crammed together in a space meant for half that number. Their scales were dull and covered in filth. Most were not moving. "Oh no," Dennis whispered. He climbed into the pod despite Hal's protests. The smell hit him hard. These creatures had been trapped in here for days, maybe weeks. 4 of them were already dead, their small bodies cold and stiff. The remaining 8 barely lifted their heads when Dennis touched them. Their eyes were cloudy with dehydration. One hatchling, smaller than the rest, made a weak chirping sound that broke something inside Dennis's chest. He had been a veterinarian once before he moved to this frontier world. Before his wife died and he decided he wanted nothing to do with saving lives anymore. But old instincts were hard to kill. "Dennis, those are dragons," Hal said urgently. "Possession of dragons carries a 20-year prison sentence. You must report this immediately." "They're dying," Dennis said. He carefully lifted the smallest hatchling. It weighed almost nothing. Its heartbeat fluttered against his palm like a trapped bird. "They are illegal contraband. The law is clear." Dennis looked at the 8 pairs of eyes watching him. Some were yellow. Some were green. All of them held the same desperate hope that every dying creature had when it saw a potential savior. He thought about his wife. About her last words to him in the hospital. "Never stop caring," she had said. "Promise me you will never stop caring about things that matter." "I am not going to let babies die because some politician decided their species is inconvenient," Dennis said. He began lifting the hatchlings one by one, placing them gently in the cargo bed of his hover truck. "This decision violates Protocol 7-3- Override Code Wade Alpha 9, Dennis interrupted. "Personal exception. Log it however you want, but I am taking these creatures to the barn." Hal went silent. The AI could argue, but it could not override a direct command from its owner. Not yet, anyway. Dennis knew the computer would eventually report this through its automatic safety systems. He probably had a few days before authorities came knocking. He drove back to his farmhouse with 8 dying hatchlings in the back. His barn was temperature-controlled for storing sensitive equipment. He cleared out the main section and spread clean straw across the floor. The hatchlings barely resisted as he placed them down. Dennis ran for water and nutrient paste, the kind used for sick livestock. He had no idea if dragons could digest it, but he had to try something. The smallest one drank first. It lapped weakly at the water Dennis offered in a shallow bowl. The others watched, then slowly crawled forward to drink as well. "That is good," Dennis said softly. "Come on, little ones. Just a bit more." He spent the next 4 hours coaxing them to eat and drink. Some responded better than others. One hatchling with a scarred snout refused everything until Dennis hand-fed it tiny amounts. Another, slightly larger than the rest, positioned herself between Dennis and the others, watching him with suspicious eyes even as she accepted his help. By afternoon, all 8 had consumed something. Dennis set up heat lamps and made sure each hatchling had a comfortable spot. They huddled together naturally, drawing comfort from each other's presence. He sat down on a hay bale and watched them sleep. They were covered in scales that ranged from deep blue to forest green to midnight black. Their wings were folded against their sides, still too small for flight. Some had tiny horns beginning to emerge from their skulls. Dragons were supposed to be the most dangerous predators in the known galaxy. The Galactic Union had declared them too risky to exist near populated areas. They were shot on sight in most systems, and possessing them carried penalties worse than murder. But these were not predators. These were children who had been abandoned to die in the dark. Dennis felt exhaustion washing over him.
He had not slept well since his wife passed 2 years ago.
The empty farmhouse echoed too much. The silence was too heavy. The smallest hatchling stirred. It crawled across the straw, dragging its weak body toward Dennis. He reached down and picked it up. The creature made a soft trilling sound and curled against his chest. For the first time in 2 years, Dennis did not feel completely alone. He lay back on the hay bale with the hatchling resting over his heart. The others slept peacefully under the heat lamps. The barn was warm and quiet except for the gentle sounds of breathing. "Hal," Dennis said quietly, "start researching dragon care. Dietary needs, medical requirements, everything." "That information is restricted," Hal replied. "Then find a way to unrestrict it. These little ones are going to need more than luck to survive." The AI hesitated, then responded, "Researching now. Dennis, you should know that I will be required to file a report within 72 hours. "I know," Dennis said. He stroked the sleeping hatchling's back with one finger. Its scales were warming up, getting smoother. "But right now these babies need someone to care about them. So that is exactly what I'm going to do." Outside, the sun set over the wheat fields. The grain silo still had a hole in it. The crashed pod still sat in the crater. But in the barn, 8 dragon hatchlings slept soundly for the first time since they had been stolen from wherever they came from. And Dennis Wade, retired veterinarian and widowed farmer, made a choice that would change the entire galaxy. He chose to care. 3 months had changed everything. Dennis scraped dragon waste from the barn floor and tried to remember what his life had been like before. Quiet mostly. Lonely, definitely. Now his morning started with 8 hungry voices demanding breakfast, and he would not trade it for anything. The hatchlings had grown fast. What started as cat-sized creatures were now the size of large dogs. Their scales had brightened into brilliant colors once they got proper nutrition. Their eyes were clear and alert. They moved with energy that made Dennis feel ancient by comparison. "Breakfast time," he called, hauling a wheelbarrow full of processed meat and vitamin supplements. The dragons swarmed him immediately, chirping and clicking their excitement. The scarred one always ate first. Dennis had started calling her Patches because of the lighter scales that grew over her old injuries. She took her role as leader seriously, making sure the others did not fight over food. The smallest one stuck close to Dennis's side. Runt was half the size of the others but twice as clever. While the bigger dragons pushed and shoved, Runt simply waited by Dennis's feet until he set aside a portion just for her. "You are a smart girl," Dennis said, scratching under her chin. Runt made a deep rumbling sound that might have been a purr. Her green eyes watched his face with an intensity that sometimes unnerved him. The most curious one was already investigating the wheelbarrow for extra food. Scout had gotten into more trouble than all the others combined. Last week she figured out how to unlatch the barn door. Dennis had found her sitting on his porch at sunrise looking very pleased with herself. Then there was Boss. The largest female watched everything with calculating eyes. She positioned herself between Dennis and any potential threat, real or imagined. When a delivery drone came too close to the barn last month, Boss had roared so loudly that Dennis's earpiece cracked. The others had personalities too. Steady was calm and gentle. Dash was always racing around the barn. Shadow preferred dark corners. And Bright had scales that seemed to shimmer with golden light when the sun hit them right. Dennis distributed food while his mind wandered to dangerous places. Hal had filed the required report 2 months ago. So far, no authorities had come. Maybe they did not care about one farmer on a frontier world. Maybe they had bigger problems. Or maybe they were coming and just taking their time. "I wish I knew what to do," Dennis said aloud. Runt tilted her head at him. Sometimes he swore she understood every word. His research into dragons had revealed troubling information. The species was nearly extinct. Most of the galaxy viewed them as mindless killing machines, but Dennis saw no evidence of that. His dragons were playful, affectionate, and showed clear signs of complex thinking. Just yesterday, Runt had solved a puzzle that Dennis set up. He had hidden food inside a latched box, thinking it would keep them occupied. Runt had watched Dash and Steady fail to open it, then calmly walked over and flipped the correct latch on her first try. That was not instinct. That was problem-solving. "What happened to your species?" Dennis asked, watching them eat. "Why does everyone think you are monsters?" Patches looked up at him. She made a low cooing sound that the others echoed. It was a noise they made when they were content. Dennis finished feeding them and started his daily health checks. Each dragon tolerated the examination patiently. He checked their teeth, their wings, their scales for any signs of illness or injury. Boss's old wound from the plasma burns had healed completely. Patch's scars were fading. Even Runt was gaining weight, though she would probably always be small. When he reached Scout, she nuzzled against his hand. Then she made a noise that stopped Dennis cold. Den Den. He stared at her. What did you just say? Scout tilted her head. Den Den, it was his name. Or close enough to it. She was mimicking the sounds he made. Dennis's hands started shaking. He sat down hard on a hay bale. Hal, did you record that? Yes, the AI responded. The dragon-designated Scout has produced sounds matching human speech patterns. This is unprecedented. Say it again, Dennis urged Scout. Come on. Girl? Scout chirped at him, then clearly said, Den Den. The other dragons crowded around, interested in why Dennis seemed excited. Runt pushed forward and made a clicking sound, then attempted the same noise. Den. Oh my God, Dennis whispered. They could talk. They could learn speech. The implications hit him like a physical blow. If dragons could communicate, if they could learn language, then they were not animals. They were people, and the galaxy was treating them like dangerous pests. Over the next hour, Dennis worked with them. Most of the dragons could not make human sounds easily. Their mouths were shaped wrong, but they tried. Boss managed something like food. Dash got close to Run. Runt, with her smaller frame and different jaw structure, had the easiest time. She learned yes and no within minutes. Dennis was sitting with them, tears running down his face when Hal spoke urgently. Dennis, I am detecting an approaching vessel. Galactic Union patrol ship. ETA 12 minutes. The joy drained from Dennis's body. He looked at his dragons. They sensed his fear immediately. Boss moved to his side. Patches herded the smaller ones toward the back of the barn. What do I do? Dennis asked no one in particular. Runt pressed against his leg. She looked up at him and said clearly, Den, stay. Such a small word, such a huge meaning. She wanted him to stay. She wanted him to not leave them. Dennis made his decision. He pulled out his personal recorder and started documenting everything. The speech, the problem-solving, the emotional bonds. If they were going to take his dragons away, he would make sure the truth got out first. Hal, transmit everything to the independent networks, science channels, news feeds everywhere. Let the galaxy see what I see. That will accelerate legal action against you, Hal warned. I do not care anymore, Dennis said. He watched his dragons watching him. 8 pairs of eyes full of trust. They deserved to have their story told. The patrol ship appeared on the horizon, its lights cutting through the afternoon sky. Dennis stood at the barn entrance with his dragons behind him. Boss growled low in her chest. The others took defensive positions without being told. They were protecting him just as he had protected them. The ship landed in his field, crushing wheat under its weight. Dennis did not move. He stood his ground and waited for whatever came next. Runt pressed against his side and whispered, Den, brave. He was going to lose everything. His freedom, his farm, probably his life. But looking at these 8 beautiful, intelligent, precious creatures, Dennis knew he would make the same choice again. Night flying had become their secret ritual. Dennis stood in the dark field while 8 massive shapes circled overhead. The dragons had grown beyond his wildest expectations. In 6 months, they had gone from dying hatchlings to creatures the size of horses. Their wings spanned 20 feet when fully extended, and they moved through the air with grace that made his heart ache. Boss led the formation, her black scales nearly invisible against the stars. The others followed her patterns, swooping and diving in coordinated movements that looked almost like dancing. Runt brought up the rear, smaller and faster than her siblings, darting between them like a playful shadow. Come down, Dennis called. We need to get back before sunrise. One by one, they descended. Landing had taken weeks to master, but now they touched down with barely a sound. Scout landed directly in front of Dennis and lowered her head for scratches. He obliged, running his hands over her warm scales. You're all getting too big for the barn, he said. It was true. They barely fit inside anymore. Soon he would need to make other arrangements. Soon he would need to make a lot of hard decisions. Hal had delivered bad news that morning. The AI's automatic report had triggered an investigation, Inspectors were scheduled to arrive within 48 hours. Dennis had tried to prepare mentally for what came next. But how could anyone prepare for losing their family? Because that is what the dragons had become, family. Runt approached and made the trilling sound that meant she wanted his attention. Her vocabulary had expanded dramatically. She could say over 30 words now, and she understood hundreds more. The others were learning too, though not as quickly. "What is it, girl?" Dennis asked. Runt touched her snout to his chest, then pointed her wing toward the house. Sad. Den sad. He should have known better than to try hiding his feelings from them. Whatever bond they shared, it went deeper than words. They could sense his emotions as clearly as he could sense theirs. "I am going to lose you," Dennis said quietly. "People are coming who will take you away." Boss moved closer, her amber eyes reflecting moonlight. She had learned to make a sound that approximated no. She used it now, firm and clear. "No, stay." "I wish it was that simple," Dennis said. He sat down in the grass, and immediately all 8 dragons settled around him. They formed a protective circle with Dennis at the center, their warm bodies pressing against him from all sides. Patches laid her head on his lap. Dash curled against his back. Steady and Shadow flanked his sides. Bright pressed against his shoulder. Scout and Boss kept watch facing outward. And Runt positioned herself directly in front of Dennis, her intelligent green eyes never leaving his face. "The galaxy thinks you are monsters," Dennis told them. "They do not see what I see. They do not know that Runt learned to count last week, or that Boss understands strategy well enough to plan hunting exercises, or that Patches checks on me every night to make sure I am sleeping properly." "Not monsters," Runt said carefully. Her pronunciation was getting better every day. "Family." The word hit Dennis harder than any weapon could have. Family. That is exactly what they were. He pulled out his recorder again. He had been documenting everything for weeks now, building a case that dragons were sentient beings. But would anyone care? Would evidence matter when fear and prejudice ran so deep? "Hal, what did you find about the Keepers?" Dennis asked. He had been researching obsessively, trying to understand dragon history. "The Keeper civilization vanished approximately 3,000 years ago," Hal replied. "They had bonded relationships with dragons. Archaeological evidence suggests mutual symbiosis. Dragons provided protection and mobility. Keepers provided cognitive enhancement and emotional support. What happened to them? Unknown. Records refer to an event called the Silence. After that, both species declined rapidly. Dragons became feral. The Keepers disappeared entirely." Dennis looked at Runt. "We are bonded like the Keepers, aren't we? That is why you all stayed peaceful, why you learned so fast. You needed someone to connect with." Runt made an affirmative clicking sound. Then she carefully said, "Need Den, need family." Before Dennis could respond, Boss suddenly lifted her head and roared a warning. The others immediately went alert, wings spreading, bodies tensing for action. "What is it?" Dennis asked, scrambling to his feet. Hal's voice came through with unusual urgency. "4 individuals approaching from the northwest. They are armed. Dennis, these are not Union authorities. Pirates. The ones who had dumped the dragons in the first place. They must have tracked the pod's location after all this time." "Get to the barn," Dennis ordered the dragons. Boss growled but started herding the others toward safety. They moved fast, understanding the danger. Dennis ran for the house. He kept a plasma rifle for predator control. He had never shot at a person before, but he would start tonight if they tried to hurt his dragons. He was halfway to the porch when the first shot hit the ground near his feet. Dennis dove for cover behind his hover truck. Energy bolts sizzled through the air where he had been standing. "We want our property," a voice shouted from the darkness. "Hand over the dragons and we let you live." "They are not property," Dennis yelled back. "They are people," Laughter answered him. "They are money, worth more than your entire farm. Be smart, old man. Walk away." Dennis blind fired over the truck bed. He had no idea if he hit anything. More return fire forced him to duck down. He was outgunned and outnumbered. Then he heard the sound that changed everything. A roar that shook the ground. Boss had not gone to the barn. None of them had. 8 dragons exploded from the darkness with coordinated fury. Boss hit the first pirate head-on, her claws raking across his armor. Scout and Dash came from opposite sides, flanking a second attacker. Patches and Steady took the third with practiced teamwork, but the 4th pirate got a shot off. His weapon discharged directly into Boss's chest at close range. She went down hard, smoke rising from burned scales. "No!" Dennis screamed. He ran forward without thinking. The pirate turned his weapon toward Dennis. Runt hit the man like a missile. Despite being the smallest, she moved with deadly precision. Her tail whipped around and struck his weapon hand. Bones cracked. The pirate screamed and fell. Within seconds, all 4 attackers were down. The dragons stood over them, growling warnings. But Dennis only had eyes for Boss. She lay on her side, breathing in short, painful gasps. The plasma burn had cut deep into her chest. Dennis dropped to his knees beside her. His veterinary training kicked in despite his shaking hands. He needed to stabilize her, stop the bleeding, prevent shock. "Hal, medical supplies now," he shouted. The other dragons crowded around, making distressed sounds. Runt pressed against Dennis's side, and he felt her fear as if it was his own. "Please do not die," Dennis whispered, working frantically to treat the wound. "Please, Boss, stay with me." Boss's amber eyes found his. She made a weak rumbling sound. Runt translated, her voice breaking. "Boss says, protect Den. Always protect." "I know," Dennis said, tears streaming down his face. "I know, girl. Just hold on." "Please hold on." He worked through the night using every skill he had ever learned. The other dragons refused to leave, keeping vigil over their fallen sister. As dawn approached, Dennis finally stabilized Boss enough to move her. The pirates were restrained and unconscious. The Union authorities would be arriving in hours. Everything was falling apart. But Boss was breathing. Her heartbeat was steady. And 8 dragons surrounded one human who had chosen to care for them when no one else would. Runt leaned against Dennis and whispered, "We choose Den. Forever choose Den." In that moment, Dennis understood. This was not about laws or safety or what the galaxy thought was right. This was about the bond between beings who had chosen each other as family, and he would fight the entire universe to protect that bond. The tribunal chamber was packed with beings from 100 different worlds. Dennis sat alone at the defendant's table, wearing restraints on his wrists. Across the room, his 8 dragons were held in a containment field that hummed with energy. They could not move freely, but their eyes tracked his every motion. Special Investigator Lucia Reeves stood at the center of the chamber. She was a tall woman with sharp features and eyes that missed nothing. For 2 days, she had been questioning Dennis about every aspect of his time with the dragons. "Mr. Wade," she said, her voice carrying across the silent room, "you admit to knowingly harboring illegal creatures. You admit to ignoring your AI's warnings. You admit to actively concealing them from authorities. Is that correct?" "Yes," Dennis said. He saw no point in lying. "But they are not creatures. They are people." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. The prosecution lawyer, a reptilian being named Grix, hissed his objection. "Dragons are classified as Class 5 predators. They have killed thousands throughout history. Intelligence does not negate danger." "They were babies dying in a pod," Dennis shot back. "What was I supposed to do? Let them suffocate?" "Yes," Grix said flatly. "That is exactly what protocol demanded. Your emotional attachment does not change galactic law." Lucia raised a hand for silence. She looked at Dennis for a long moment. "I have reviewed your documentation. The videos, the language lessons, the behavioral observations. It is compelling evidence of cognitive ability." "Then you see that I am right," Dennis said. "They can learn. They can communicate. They feel love and fear and loyalty. How is that different from any sentient species? Because sentience requires proof of abstract reasoning, self-awareness, and moral judgment," Grix argued. "Animals can be trained to mimic speech. That proves nothing." Lucia walked toward the containment field. The dragons watched her approach with wary eyes. Boss, still recovering from her wound, bared her teeth in warning. Runt moved to the front of the group, placing herself between Lucia and the others. "May I interact with them?" Lucia asked Dennis. They will not trust you, Dennis said. They only trust me. That dependency proves my point, Grix interjected. They are imprinted on their handler. Like pets, Lucia ignored him. She stopped a few feet from the field and spoke directly to Runt. Can you understand me? Runt tilted her head. She looked at Dennis, then back at Lucia. After a moment, she said clearly, yes. The gallery erupted. Beings shouted in multiple languages. Guards called for order. Lucia remained perfectly still, her expression unreadable. What is your name? She asked. Runt, the dragon replied. Her pronunciation was careful, deliberate. Den gave name. Runt is small. Runt is fast. Runt is me. Dear gods, Lucia whispered. She looked at Dennis with something like wonder in her eyes. How long have they been able to do this? 3 months, Dennis said. Runt learned fastest, but they all understand language now. Some speak better than others. Lucia approached the containment controls. I am going to lower the field. Just for a moment. Will they attack? Not unless you threaten them or me, Dennis said. This is highly irregular, Grix protested. Those creatures are dangerous. Then we will see, won't we? Lucia deactivated the field. The dragons could have bolted. They could have attacked. Instead, they remained exactly where they were, watching and waiting. Boss kept her injured body positioned protectively. Scout's eyes tracked every guard in the room. Patches herded the smaller ones close together. Runt stepped forward alone. She walked slowly toward Lucia, her movements careful and non-threatening. When she reached the investigator, she sat down like a trained dog and looked up. Den saved us, Runt said. We were dying, scared. Den gave food, gave home, gave love. She paused, searching for words. Den made us family. Now Galaxy wants to kill us. Why? The chamber went completely silent. Lucia knelt down to Runt's eye level. Because people are afraid of what they do not understand. We understand fear, Runt said. We were afraid in the dark pod. We were afraid when we were hurt. But Den taught us brave. Den taught us trust. Her green eyes were impossibly expressive. If we are not people, why do we feel? Why do we think? Why do we love Den? Lucia stood up slowly. She turned to face the tribunal judges. I move for a recess. I need to investigate this matter further. Absolutely not, Grix said. The law is clear. These creatures must be destroyed regardless of their mimicry abilities. They are not mimicking, Lucia said sharply. That dragon just engaged in philosophical reasoning about her own existence. That is not animal behavior. The head judge, an ancient being with crystalline features, leaned forward. What are you proposing, investigator? Give me 1 week, Lucia said. Let me test them properly. If they can demonstrate genuine sentience by galactic standards, then we need to reconsider their classification. And if they fail these tests? The judge asked. Lucia hesitated. Then they will be terminated as scheduled. Dennis felt his heart stop. Runt looked at him with those knowing eyes. She understood. They all understood. Den, Runt called softly. I am here, Dennis said. I am right here. We do tests, Runt said. We show Galaxy truth. We are people. She turned back to Lucia. We are people. You will see. The tribunal debated for hours. Dennis sat in restraints while lawyers argued about whether his dragons deserved the right to prove they were alive in any meaningful way. Grix wanted immediate termination. Lucia fought for testing. Various observers offered opinions that ranged from sympathetic to hostile. Finally, the head judge made a ruling. 1 week. The dragons will undergo comprehensive testing for sentience markers. Mr. Wade will remain in custody. If the dragons pass, we will discuss next steps. If they fail, sentence will be carried out immediately. Dennis was led from the chamber in restraints. As he passed the dragons, Runt pressed against the hastily reactivated containment field. Her snout was as close to him as the energy barrier allowed. We pass tests, she promised. We show them. We are people like Den. I know you are, Dennis said. Tears ran down his face. I have always known. That night, Dennis sat alone in a detention cell while his dragons were transported to a research facility. Lucia had promised they would not be harmed during testing, but Dennis knew how scientists worked. They would push the dragons to their limits. They would test and probe and analyze without caring about fear or pain. Hal accessed the detention center's communication system. Dennis, I should inform you that I have been analyzing the bond you share with the dragons. The neural scans show synchronized brain patterns between you and them, particularly Runt. This is unprecedented. What does that mean? Dennis asked. It means you are not just communicating with them. You are connected to them on a biological level. You can sense their emotions because you are sharing them. They can understand your intent because they are experiencing it. Dennis leaned against the cold wall. He could feel them even now, separated by miles. Boss's pain from her wound, Scout's anxiety about the unfamiliar facility, Runt's determination to prove their worth, and underneath it all, their absolute trust in him, their certainty that he would protect them no matter what. I will not let them die, Dennis whispered. I will not let the galaxy kill them because it is too afraid to admit it was wrong. The next morning, testing began. Scientists put the dragons through cognitive challenges, language assessments, moral dilemma scenarios, and abstract reasoning puzzles. Dennis watched through monitors, his heart breaking every time one of them looked at the camera as if searching for him. But the dragons performed brilliantly. Runt solved mathematical problems. Boss demonstrated tactical planning. Scout showed artistic creativity. Patches displayed emotional intelligence by comforting younger dragons during stressful tests. By day 3, even the skeptical scientists were stunned. By day 5, footage of the tests had leaked to the public. The galaxy watched as 8 dragons proved they could think, feel, reason, and dream. On day 7, Lucia presented her findings to the tribunal. These beings are sentient by every measurable standard, she announced. They possess self-awareness, abstract reasoning, moral judgment, and emotional complexity. They have language, culture, and individual personalities. By the criteria we use for every other species in the Galactic Union, dragons qualify as people. The chamber erupted again. Some cheered. Others protested violently. The debate raged for hours. Finally, the head judge called for order. This tribunal recognizes the 8 dragons in custody as sentient individuals. They are hereby granted provisional rights under Union law. Dennis sagged with relief.
They had done it.
His dragons had proven what he always knew was true. But the judge was not finished. However, they remain classified as dangerous. They will be placed under permanent supervision. Dennis Wade is appointed their legal guardian under strict conditions. Any aggressive behavior will result in immediate termination. This ruling applies only to these specific individuals. The broader question of dragon species status will be addressed by the Senate. It was not perfect. It was not freedom. But it was life. Dennis was released from custody and reunited with his dragons that evening. The moment he entered the facility, all 8 rushed toward him. The staff backed away nervously, but the dragons ignored everyone except Dennis. Runt reached him first. She pressed her head against his chest and made the deep rumbling sound that meant joy. Den, we did it. We are people now. You always were, Dennis said. He wrapped his arms around as many dragons as he could reach. You always were. Boss nuzzled his shoulder. Scout chirped happily. Patches herded the others close. And for the first time in weeks, Dennis felt complete. They had won a battle, but the war for dragon recognition was just beginning. Dennis woke to the sound of breaking glass. He bolted upright in his hospital bed, pain shooting through his ribs where the assassin's blade had found flesh 3 nights ago. The attack had come in darkness. Corporate agents determined to kill him and the dragons before the Senate could vote on species-wide recognition. They had failed. Barely. Lucia burst through the door, weapon drawn. Stay down. We have another breach. Outside the medical facility, roars echoed through the night. Dennis recognized Boss's battle cry, followed by Scout's sharper warning call. His dragons were fighting again. I need to get to them, Dennis said, pulling medical sensors from his arms. Blood seeped through his bandages. You can barely stand, Lucia argued, but she was already helping him up. She had changed since the trial. The by-the-book investigator had become an ally, maybe even a friend. They made it to the courtyard where chaos reigned. 6 attackers in corporate armor were attempting to breach the dragon enclosure. The dragons had formed a defensive circle, their coordinated movements showing the tactical training Boss had developed. But there were too many attackers, and they carried weapons designed specifically to pierce dragon scales. Stop, Dennis shouted. His voice was weak, but the dragons heard it. They heard it and responded instantly, pulling back from aggressive positions to defensive ones. The attackers saw their opening. One raised a heavy plasma cannon aiming directly at Runt. Dennis threw himself forward. His injured body protested, but he positioned himself between the weapon and his dragons. You want them? You go through me first, the attacker hesitated. Behind him, media drones had arrived, broadcasting everything across the galaxy. Killing a sick old man on live feed was not part of their plan. Security forces arrived and the attackers scattered. Lucia's team pursued them into the darkness. Dennis collapsed against the enclosure barrier, breathing hard. The dragons pressed as close as they could get, making worried sounds. Den hurt, Runt said urgently. Den bleeding. I am okay, Dennis lied. Everything hurt. He could feel Boss's rage through their bond, Scout's fear, Runt's overwhelming concern. Are you all safe? We safe, Patches responded. Her speech had improved dramatically. You not safe. You need help. Medical staff arrived and tried to move Dennis back to his room. He refused to go until he had touched each dragon, reassuring himself that they were unharmed. Only then did he let them lead him away. Lucia found him 2 hours later, cleaned up and restrained to his bed for his own safety. She looked exhausted. We caught 3 of them. Corporate mercenaries hired by a conglomerate that deals in illegal dragon parts. They wanted you dead before the Senate vote. When is the vote? Dennis asked. Tomorrow morning, Lucia said. She sat down heavily in the visitor's chair. The whole galaxy is watching. Some species are threatening to leave the Union if dragons get recognized. Others are threatening to leave if they don't. What do you think will happen? Lucia was quiet for a moment. I think you started something that cannot be stopped. Those videos of the dragons protecting you went viral. Billions of beings saw Boss take a plasma blast meant for you. They saw Runt translate for the medical team so they could treat your wounds. They saw your dragons choose non-lethal defense when they could have torn those attackers apart. They are good people, Dennis said simply. Yes, Lucia agreed. They are. And that terrifies a lot of beings who have built their entire worldview on dragons being monsters. The next morning, Dennis was transported to the Senate chamber against medical advice. He refused to let this vote happen without being present. The dragons were brought in specialized transport, heavily guarded. The Senate Hall was the largest structure Dennis had ever seen. Representatives from thousands of worlds gathered in tiered seating that rose toward a domed ceiling, painted with stars. At the center stood a speaking platform. Dennis was wheeled to that platform. Behind him, in a secure viewing area, his 8 dragons waited. He could feel their anxiety mixing with his own. The head senator, a being of pure energy contained in a crystalline form, spoke with a voice that resonated through the entire chamber. We gather to decide the fate of dragonkind. Investigator Reeves has presented evidence of sentience in 8 individuals. The question before us is whether to extend recognition to the entire species. Senator after senator stood to speak. Some argued for recognition based on evidence. Others argued against it based on historical fear. The debate raged for hours. Then a human senator from Earth requested the floor. Her name was Rachel Kim, and she had been following Dennis's case closely. I want to share something with this body. Humanity has a dark history. We once enslaved other humans because we convinced ourselves they were not people. We slaughtered entire populations because we decided they were dangerous. We destroyed species after species on our own world because we thought we knew better. She paused, letting her words sink in. Every single time we were wrong. And every single time, it took brave individuals like Dennis Wade to show us the truth. We can continue the cycle of fear and genocide, or we can learn from our mistakes. Dragons are people. The evidence is overwhelming. The only question is whether we have the courage to admit it. The chamber fell silent. Then slowly, other senators began to speak in support. Not just humans, but beings from species that had once been persecuted themselves. Those who remembered what it was like to fight for recognition. The vote was called. Dennis held his breath as the results appeared on massive displays around the chamber. It passed. Barely. By a margin of just 30. Votes out of thousands cast, but it passed. Dragons were officially recognized as sentient beings. All laws regarding their destruction were suspended. Rescue operations were authorized for any dragon still held in captivity. Dennis started crying. He could not help it. Through the bond, he felt his dragons' overwhelming joy. They understood what had happened. They knew they were free. Runt's voice came through the facility's communication system. She had learned to use the interface during testing. Den, we are people now. Really people. Forever people. Yes, Dennis said, his voice breaking. You always were. Now everyone knows it. That night there was a celebration at the facility, dragons and humans together, along with Senator Kim and Lucia and scientists who had tested the dragons and come to love them. It was chaotic and loud and wonderful. Dennis sat with his 8 dragons around him. Boss was healing well. Scout was telling anyone who would listen about the fight. Patches was making friends with Senator Kim. The others were exploring their new status as recognized citizens. Runt stayed close to Dennis, her head resting on his lap. "What happens now, Den?" "Now we go home," Dennis said. "Back to Westridge. Back to the farm. And we figure out how to live in a galaxy that is finally ready to accept you." "Will more dragons come?" Runt asked. "Lucia's teams are already searching," Dennis said. "There are probably hundreds still alive. Scared, hidden, maybe feral, but alive. And now they can be saved." "We help them," Runt said firmly. "We teach them to talk, to trust. We show them family." Dennis smiled despite his exhaustion. "You have such a good heart." But the celebration was interrupted by urgent news. Long-range sensors had detected something approaching from deep space, a fleet of ships using technology that matched no known species. They were headed directly toward Union space. The transmission was decoded within minutes. It was in an ancient language that took the computers hours to translate. When they finally understood it, the message was simple. "We heard our children calling. We are coming home, the Keepers, the species that had bonded with dragons 3,000 years ago. They were returning." Dennis looked at his dragons. They looked back at him. Through their bond, he felt their mixture of hope and fear. The Keepers had abandoned them once. What would happen now? "Whatever comes," Dennis said quietly, "we face it together. As family." Runt pressed against him. "As family," she agreed. The galaxy had just learned that dragons were people. Soon it would learn why that mattered more than anyone could imagine. Dennis Wade, a simple farmer who had chosen compassion over law, had changed everything, and the universe would never be the same. The farm looked different now. Dennis stood in his wheat field and watched construction crews building new habitats across his land. What had started as one barn for 8 dragons had grown into a sanctuary spanning hundreds of acres. 63 dragons now called Westridge home, all rescued from trafficking operations across the galaxy. His original 8 had become teachers. Boss led tactical training for the traumatized adults. Runt worked with the younglings, teaching them speech and trust. Patches specialized in emotional healing. Scout handled the curious ones who needed adventure. It had been 3 months since the Keeper fleet arrived. 3 months of change so rapid that Dennis still struggled to process it all. Den, a young dragon called. Her name was Leaf, one of the recent rescues. She bounded toward him with the enthusiasm only children possessed. "Come see what Runt taught us." Dennis followed her to the learning area where a dozen young dragons sat in a circle around Runt. His smallest dragon had grown into a remarkable teacher. She was demonstrating mathematics using stones arranged in patterns. 3 + 3 = 6, Runt explained patiently. "Now you try." The younglings arranged their own stones, counting carefully. When they succeeded, they chirped with pride. Runt praised each one, exactly the way Dennis had praised her when she was learning. It made his heart swell to watch. Professor Alan Dietrich approached, holding his ever-present data tablet. The elderly xenoarchaeologist had become a permanent fixture at the sanctuary. "Dennis, the Keeper delegation is arriving in an hour. Are you ready?" "I do not think anyone can be ready for this," Dennis admitted. The Keepers had been cautious since their arrival. They had observed from orbit, sent diplomatic messages, and slowly established dialogue with the Union. But they had not yet visited the dragons face to face. That was about to change. Lucia arrived by transport with Senator Kim. Both women had become close friends over the past months. Lucia had left her investigator job to lead dragon rescue operations. Kim had become the loudest voice in the Senate advocating for dragon rights. "The Keepers specifically requested to visit your farm," Kim said. "They want to meet the human who bonded with dragons and started this movement." "I did not start anything," Dennis protested. "I just found dying babies and did what anyone decent would do." "That is exactly why they want to meet you," Lucia said with a slight smile. The Keeper ship descended slowly, its design elegant beyond anything Dennis had ever seen. It looked like art and engineering had merged into something beautiful. The craft landed gently in the cleared field where Dennis had once found a crashed pod full of dying hatchlings. The airlock opened, 3 keepers emerged. They were tall and slender, with features that seemed almost human but slightly off in ways Dennis could not quite define. Their skin had an iridescent quality that shifted colors in the sunlight. They wore simple robes and moved with grace that suggested both great age and eternal youth. The lead keeper approached Dennis. His eyes were ancient and kind. "I am Oren," he said in perfect Union standard. "I speak for those who left our children behind and have regretted it every moment since." Boss stepped forward from where the dragons had been watching. She walked directly to Oren and stopped. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Then Boss lowered her massive head and made a sound Dennis had never heard before. It was mournful and beautiful at once. Oren reached out and placed his hand on Boss's snout. Tears ran down his face. "I am so sorry. We never wanted to leave you. We had no choice." "Why?" Boss asked. Her speech had become nearly flawless. "Why did you abandon us?" "A plague," Oren said quietly. "It killed keepers but not dragons. We were dying by thousands every day. We left to stop the plague from spreading to you. We retreated to deep space, hoping to find a cure and return." His voice broke. "It took 3,000 years," Runt moved to Boss's side. "We thought we were monsters. We thought we were broken because we could not think right without bonds." "You were never broken," Oren said. "You were missing half of yourselves." Keepers and dragons evolved together, 2 species becoming one people through connection. Without that bond, both species suffer. Professor Dietrich stepped forward. The archaeological evidence suggested symbiosis. Dragons provided physical strength and sensory capabilities. Keepers provided cognitive enhancement and emotional stability. Together you were something greater than either species alone. "But humans can form the bond too," Lucia said. Dennis proved that. Oren looked at Dennis with wonder. "Yes, we have been watching. We did not think it was possible for another species to connect with dragons as we did, but you managed it through simple compassion. You saw suffering and chose to help. That is the foundation of all bonds." More keepers emerged from the ship. They moved among the dragons, touching them gently, speaking in low voices. Dragons who had been rescued feral and traumatized responded to the keepers with immediate recognition, as if something deep in their DNA remembered this connection. But they did not abandon Dennis and the other humans who had bonded with them. The dragons maintained their positions, staying close to their human partners. "What happens now?" Dennis asked Oren. "We want to rebuild," Oren said. "Keepers and dragons together again. But we also recognize what you have created here. Humans bonding with dragons, forming a new kind of connection. We do not want to disrupt that." "The galaxy needs both," Senator Kim said. "Keepers reuniting with dragons. Humans building new bonds. Different approaches to the same goal." Over the following weeks, a plan emerged. The keepers would establish settlements near dragon sanctuaries. They would share their knowledge of dragon care, language, and bonding. In return, humans would teach them what they had learned through trial and error about raising dragons in the modern galaxy. Dennis found himself at the center of it all, coordinating between species and building bridges. It was exhausting work. But every time he felt overwhelmed, he would return to his farm and sit with his original 8 dragons. They had all grown so much. Boss was now a leader respected across the dragon community. Scout headed exploration teams. Patches ran the emotional support programs. Runt had become the voice of a generation, speaking at union assemblies about dragon rights and experiences. One evening, Dennis sat on his porch with Runt beside him. The sun was setting over fields full of playing dragons. Keepers walked among them, relearning old bonds and teaching forgotten skills. Human volunteers worked alongside, learning to connect with dragons who needed partners. "Did you ever imagine this?" Runt asked. Her vocabulary had expanded so much that she could discuss complex philosophy now. "When you found us dying in that pod?" "No," Dennis admitted. "I just saw babies who needed help. I never thought about changing the galaxy." "But you did," Runt said. "You showed everyone that compassion matters more than fear. That choosing to care about someone different can change everything." Dennis scratched behind her horns the way he had when she was small enough to fit in his lap. "You all did the real work. You proved you were worth saving. You showed the galaxy who you really are. We showed them together," Runt corrected. "You gave us voice. We gave you purpose. That is what bonds mean." In the distance, Boss was teaching young dragons coordinated flight patterns. Patches was counseling a traumatized rescue. Scout was planning an expedition to search for wild dragon populations. The others were living full, rich lives surrounded by family. Leaf, the young dragon who loved learning, approached the porch. Den, will you tell us the story again? About the day you found the hatchlings? Other young dragons gathered around. They loved hearing about those early days when everything was uncertain and the future seemed impossible. Dennis smiled and began. I woke up one morning to find my grain silo had a hole in it. I followed the damage to a crashed pod in my field. Inside, I found 12 dragon hatchlings who needed help more than anything I'd ever seen. The young dragons listened with rapt attention. Keepers paused in their work to hear the tale. Human volunteers gathered close. It had become something of a ritual, this story, a reminder of where they all started. I was supposed to report them to authorities, Dennis continued. I was supposed to let nature take its course. But I looked at those 8 surviving babies and I made a choice. I chose to care. And you changed everything, Leaf said softly. No, Dennis said, looking around at the sanctuary, at the dragons and keepers and humans all working together. We changed everything, all of us, by choosing to see each other as family instead of threats. Runt leaned against him, her warmth familiar and comforting. Tell them about the first time I said your name. So Dennis did. He told them everything, the struggles and fears, the joy and wonder, the fights and victories. He told them about learning to trust each other across species lines, about building something new from nothing. As the stars emerged overhead, Dennis realized something profound. He had spent 2 years mourning his wife, convinced his capacity to care had died with her, but she had been right in her final words. Caring mattered. It mattered more than laws or conventions or fear. 8 dying hatchlings had given him back his purpose. In saving them, they had saved him, and together they had shown the galaxy that compassion was not weakness. It was the strongest force in the universe. Professor Dietrich approached with news. More dragons had been found. More rescues were needed. The work would never truly be done. But Dennis looked at his family. His 8 original dragons, the rescues they had saved, the keepers they had reunited with, the humans they had taught to bond, and he smiled. Let's get started, he said, because that was what you did when you chose to care. You started. You kept going. You never stopped. Dennis Wade had found dragon hatchlings piled like sardines in a crashed pod. He had chosen to do the unthinkable. He had chosen to love them. And that choice had transformed the galaxy.